Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Roxana Usner. I am very happy to introduce both our sponsor and our speaker tonight. This event is being sponsored by Docomomo, and Paula Peer with Trappel & Peer Architects is here tonight to introduce you to what Docomomo does. It's a very amazing organization that's doing some really good work, especially with respect to mid-century modern architecture in South Louisiana. Paula?
Thanks, Roxana. Yeah, I'm Paula Peer. I'm the vice president of Docomomo, and some of you are like, what is Docomomo? What does that even mean? It's actually a worldwide organization that is that advocates for the preservation of specifically mid-century modern architecture. In the U.S., they have chapters that are kind of usually statewide. So we were Docomomo, Louisiana for a long time, and we've expanded that region to the Gulf South because there's a pretty big gap between the next chapter. So this is our first event in Lafayette. We were on a mission. We started our programming about 4 years ago, kind of ramping it up again. You can learn a little more about some of the things that we do. You know, if our mission is to advocate for preservation, then the first thing we started to do was documenting and making story maps of mid-century modern architecture around New Orleans. We have a plan. We're working with Louisiana Consolidated Government, Roxana's office, to document the oil center and build story maps for this region as well. And we plan on doing that across the whole state. So excited about that. Some of our other programming is, you know, documentary screenings on like the Wiener Brothers documentary in Shreveport. You know, we had screenings of that across the state. Panel discussions and events like this, and of course tours, because we want people to understand the value of mid-century. And someone who can really kind of give a really big highlight on that is why we're thrilled to be here today with Jeffery. So anyway, if you want to become a member, all of the proceeds from membership go to the chapter and directly towards advocacy throughout the region. And if you don't want to be a member but you just want to support, there's also a sign-in at the front. So thank you so much for being here. And I guess I can tell you, so this is part one. Jeffrey's going to make his presentation today. We're very excited about. Part two is he's going to moderate a panel discussion on September 21st. And you can learn more about, there's going to be some local architects here that are presenting the work that they've done here on some mid-century modern buildings. We'll talk about transformative adaptive reuse, historic tax credits, how that all kind of plays into kind of and encourages that preservation of this work. So anyway, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. As Paula said, in Lafayette, we are we have an endeavor to document many of the mid-century modern buildings in Lafayette, the Dobie House. I mean, there are tons of buildings. They're sort of hidden. The buildings that still stand and haven't been heavily altered, and many of them have been heavily altered. We want to document those. We want to put them in a story map. A story map is nothing more than a map with a bunch of pictures and write-ups. As a matter of fact, the Lafayette Consolidated Government has already done a story map of the oil center because the oil center is a National Register historic district. Part of the oil center is this building all the way down to the post office is a district. And what that means is that you can get, for maintenance or any kind of adaptive reuse projects in these buildings, like was done at the Piccadilly with Chris Rader's company. That was recently done at 126 Hyman with the Foundation for Wellness of ACADIANA. That's an adaptive reuse of an original mid-century modern building. You can get tax credits for that, which help the cost of keeping the building as it was designed. And so that's just a little bit of a nerdy role that we're playing here with respect to mid-century modern architecture in Lafayette. And now I would like to introduce Jeffery McCullough. He's an educator, designer, historian, assistant professor of interior design in the CIDA-Accredited Kean University Bachelor of Fine Arts Interior Design program, a graduate of the History of Design Master of Arts program at Parsons School of Design, the new school located in Greenwich Village, New York City. McCullough's teaching and research is centered on design history. As a frequent presenter on panels and conferences, primary research topics of design democracy and expanding the canon of design history are constantly engaged with and expanded upon. Active learning modules for the design history education form the foundation for McCullough's pedagogical approach, as does his residential interior design career of 25 years. McCullough and partner Tim Allis, author of Henri Bendel and the Worlds He Fashioned, divide their time between New York City and Lafayette, Louisiana. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much, Roxana, and a huge thank you to DocoMomo for hosting tonight, and moreover, for supporting research, cataloging, and preservation of mid-century modern architecture. An extra special thank you to Roxana, who not only is interested in the topic at hand, but is a leader in preservation locally. And the words that she was saying there are really important. And I'm glad she started with that, because I will end on that topic. I'm looking around the room, and I need to say several special thank yous. There are several members of the LeGroux family here tonight who have just been amazing partners as I dive into the life and career of their father and grandfather, so I really appreciate that. I see Miss Sylvia Perkins back in the back, who knows where a lot of things happened, because not only was she married to Hal Perkins, but she worked for the firm LeGroux Perkins and actually was working there when Hal Perkins came to work there. So she goes back to the Perkins part of the LeGroux Perkins firm. Several people have opened their house to me to see, and that's been extra special. That's so important as I continue working on this project. And I want to thank Ms. Doby, who's here tonight. I talked about your house a lot in November. I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but just know that it was a star of my presentation that I gave at the Center for Louisiana Studies in November. And there are several of you that I need to connect with, because you live in houses by the architects whose work I'm interested in. So I hope you'll connect with me. I have a long list, and I will try to work down that list over time. But if you're here tonight and you live in a house or work in a building by any of the architects that I discussed, I'd love to connect with you, because that type of primary source material about your lived experience in those spaces is really important. I also want to thank Susan Stephen, who's here tonight, because she's really opened up about her uncle, who was pretty much, I would say, lost to history in the area, and that's a shame, because his career is so very special. So thank you for opening up about that with me. Okay, I thought it would be helpful for the audience to know why me, and why this topic, and how the project has evolved just in the last 8 months since I spoke at the Center for Louisiana Studies. The title of that presentation was Crafting the Design Ethos of Mid-Century Acadiana, the architecture of Harold Lefty LeGroux, Dave Perkins, Hal Perkins, Robert Stephen, and A. Hayes Town. Since then, discoveries have made it clear that others must be included, for whatever this becomes, book, exhibition, both, to actually be a complete project. So until I finalize the architects, the working title will be The Mid-Century Modern Ethos of Acadiana, as it was titled tonight. As a tenure-track professor of design history in the Michael Graves College of Architecture and Design at Kean University in New Jersey, about 1/3 of my time is dedicated to research. It's wise to have 2 or 3 topics that aren't topics that are already so well researched and written about that there really isn't anything else to be added to the conversations around the topic. If there's overlap between the topics, even better. And that's the case with 2 of the topics that I've been engaged with. Expanding the canon of American design, meaning bringing awareness to the architects and designers who are not yet in textbooks, and the mid-century modern ethos of Acadiana as expressed through architecture. The foundation of my pedagogical approach is that design cannot be separated from time and place. That's true throughout history. But it's not talked enough just how much a time period and a geographic location are intrinsically connected to the design that is happening, and that the design that is happening during a certain time in that place is a great lens through which to see and understand what was happening then and there. How I got to this topic really is a story of 6 houses that interested me enough to want to know more about who designed them. So I'm not from here originally, I'm from South Georgia, but thanks to Tim, I started spending time here. I actually realized when I was coming over here, it would have been about this week or last week, 21 years ago, when I came to Lafayette for the very first time. And I suddenly realized how many cool mid-century modern houses there were in Bendel Gardens, where Tim's family lived, and I was often driving around. But of all of them, 2 really spoke to me, and I wanted to know more. The first one is the Azar House that H.J. LeGroux designed for Dr. and Mrs. Paul Azar in 1958. The Azars were already his clients because he designed Dr. Azar's office. And if you think your eyes are tricking you by the mountains in the background and the fact that it says Denver 1969, I assure you it is at, is it 101 Beverly Drive or 100 Marguerite? You lived there. April actually lived there for a couple of years, lucky, right before it got renovated. So she actually got to live in its mid-century modern glory. And I almost got to design that house for a client that was going to buy it. And it's one of those moments that still stings. This is from Secretariat, the great movie. And if you've not seen Secretariat and you're interested in Lafayette architecture, I recommend that you watch the film, because this house is not the only house in the movie that was designed by one of the architects that are part of my research. Robert Stephen designed the house on Twin Oaks Boulevard that was used in the movie. That is not a mid-century modern house, but it was designed by Robert Stephen. The Dave Perkins version of the Blackham Coliseum is in the movie, and you can briefly see, if you're really looking for something, you actually can see Fatima for a moment, and that was designed by LeGroux and Hal Perkins. So this house really got me. I wanted to know more. I wanted to be in it. Eventually I would be. Everything about it screams mid-century modern, but what I love is so much is that you can also see there's some Frank Lloyd Wright inspiration going on there, especially the Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian homes. And if you don't know the Usonian homes by Frank Lloyd Wright, that's a whole genre that he really was working on in the 1940s and the early 50s. And there's no question that LeGroux would have been aware of what Frank Lloyd Wright was doing. They were all aware because they went to conferences and learned. The fenestration, meaning the placement of windows, is a telltale sign that it's a mid-century modern house. And the fact that it's so low slung and sort of hugs the ground and has the low pitched roof is also a characteristic. Not every mid-century modern has to have a flat roof. Just an inside shot from the inside looking out, and that's another characteristic of mid-century modern, is that there's often a flow between indoors and outdoors. It's very seamless. The neutral brick is also a characteristic. I learned quickly that this Perkins house that people were just saying, oh, that's the Perkins house, was the house of David L. Perkins. And this doesn't look quite like this anymore, but it has been thoughtfully restored recently by Zonbrecker Design. But this was Dave Perkins' personal house. I like to show the image at the bottom because it has the Saarinen dining table, and you can see in the back, I think this was at the estate sale, coffee table in the back, chairs, and the fact that it has these neutral tones that make it sort of almost disappear in a way into the South Louisiana landscape is another characteristic. And of course, it does have the flat roof and then a pitched roof area. This is a house that obviously is not mid-century modern, but it's very important in my journey in town because in 2008, I became acquainted with this great house on St. Mary Boulevard. It was designed by LeGroux for the Sacheries, and potential interior design clients of mine had bought it. It is a fine home with wonderful architectural details. Fortunately, 17 years later, after the new owners became clients, I'm still very much engaged with this house and know it very well, as I do the owners who are here tonight, Phil and Jessica Gauchessin, who are only the second owners of this 1951 gem. This house really became an education for me in the characteristics of LeGroux's work, no matter what style he's working in. This is an obvious mid-century modern masterpiece. Sadly, I have to say was, which breaks my heart, and I'm sure it breaks the heart of a big table of people back in the back, but it's nearly unrecognizable at this point. Because I knew Peggy LeGroux Derby slightly through her art gallery and then got to know her later, she invited me into the house when she knew that I was interested in it years ago. And to be in it was just a thrill. I'll show you some inside shots. Everything about it, just perfection. The St. Joe brick, the stone floor, the open space, the feeling between the kitchen and the dining area with the Saarinen tulip chairs and table, and Eames chair there in the foreground. There's this constant flow of inside, outside, big expanses of glass. You can see the St. Joe brick continues on the outside, and then these sort of, the color story just almost blends in, right? Nothing sticks out about the house, which I love. Now this house was an absolute mystery until I spoke in November. And I raised some questions about it in my talk in November. For years, it had been presented as fact, absolute fact, to me that this house had been designed by A. Hayes Town. Because I threw out the mystery to the audience when I spoke at the Center for Louisiana Studies, someone said, well, I know who lives there, I'll connect you. And we have since connected, and I actually was in it about 2 weeks ago. It was designed by H.J. LeGroux and Hal Perkins in 1965 for Mr. and Mrs. George Grafton. It is, I want to read this as I wrote it exactly, so you understand. So the house has had only minor alterations since the McKays, and I don't know if Jennifer McKay is here tonight. If you are, raise your hand. She's not. When they moved to Lafayette from New Orleans post-Katrina after their house had flooded in New Orleans. Sadly, this house flooded in 2016 here in Lafayette, obviously, and it's in constant danger of flooding again. And so they are loving on it and they are taking care of it, but it is truly in constant danger of flooding. And so for as long as it is with us, it is a wonderful house that is pure mid-century modern. And if you're ever back on Thibodeau Drive, look at it. It's really special. And the trees are amazing around it. And then this finally is the house that really, other than the LeGroux connection, and my big interest there, this mystery really sent me down rabbit holes that probably seeded this project more than anything. So Tim and I found what you see here, which is just a photograph of blueprints, of a house that Robert L. Stephen designed in 1950 for Tim's grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Pierre Lacaze, that never got built and was intended to be built exactly where our house stands now. But our house was built 9 years later and was not this house and was not even designed by Robert Stephen. So we have no idea why it never got built, and we probably never will know, obviously. A few years ago, I went down the internet rabbit hole trying to find as much as I could about this architect. And what I discovered was that he was a prolific architect who had a big career, building residential houses, mostly quite traditional, in the great neighborhoods of Lafayette. But his bread and butter was a roster of major commercial projects, and some you'll hear me attach his name to tonight, mostly mid-century modern. So the dichotomy of the career was fascinating then, and it still is now, especially since I know far more about him and his career. Moreover, that he had so much work and such a big practice at one point, a staff of 17, but his loss to history is really sad, and it is a driving force of mine to correct that course. So those 6 houses planted seeds years ago, and now you've got me here tonight. The scope of the project, time and place. ACADIANA, a 22-parish area of southwest Louisiana with Lafayette as the hub city. You see statistics that show that Lafayette's population more than doubled from 1940 to 1960. Most of that growth was a result of the booming oil business and other expanding industries because of the boom. The time period of 1950 to 1970 is the focus because the 50s and 60s are when the architectural landscape really shifted. Of course, those lines always are blurred at the early and later edges because design doesn't change with the calendar year. And so a late 1940s project and a very early 1970s project might be of great interest and perfect for this research project. For example, before we dive into the 1950s, I want to bring us to the 1940s to explore what was happening architecturally in the region, just prior to the years that are being explored through this project. So first, let's look at interesting statistics. And this, to me, this really helps us to understand the way that Lafayette grew, but not just Lafayette, all of Acadiana, at such a huge pace. In 1939, there were only 2 architectural firms in the Lafayette City Directory. W.F. Bowen, a show of hands of anyone other than Roxana Usner who's ever heard of the architect W.F. Bowen? Okay. It's fascinating. Susan has, because Robert worked for him. I'm assuming maybe why you know. Oh, well then we need to talk more, Susan. And the other firm was Overstreet in Town. Now, that's Hayes Town, but he was in partnership with Overstreet from when he had lived in Jackson, Mississippi, and then they opened a Lafayette office. In 1949, there were still only 2 architectural firms in the Lafayette City Directory, W.F. Bowen and H.J. LeGroux Jr. LeGroux had worked for Bowen for 2 years, and by 49, opened his own firm. No more Town. Town is decamped to Baton Rouge, and that's where his office is at that point. 1959, 10 architectural firms, okay? So it goes 2, 2, 10. That's a significant jump. And it speaks to what was happening at that time that architects would open offices here. Architects don't move into towns that are dead and open offices, right? It's too risky. So it speaks to the boom. Those include, I don't name them all, W.F. Bowen, LeGroux and Hal Perkins, who joined LeGroux's firm in 1953, Dave Perkins, Robert Stephen, Donald O'Rourke, and both Frederick Nurbass and Neil Nurbass. Late career Frederick Nurbass is of interest to me for this project, and early career Neil Nurbass is of interest to me for this project. And Donald O'Rourke's career is in the next phase of research. We're looking at the just finished Bank of Sunset. That was, in 1948, when the bank moved into its new digs, quote, one of the most modern banking facilities in the state for a bank of its size. The architect of record is W.F. Bowen. He is significant, not just because of the great work that he had done prior that was not modern at all, but because he had this long career and, like Hayes Town, worked in a lot of styles over the years. Bowen was born in 1884 and lived to 90 years old. And so if you're born in 1884 and you don't die until 1970, you are going to work in different styles over different times. What makes him significant for this research project is that by the time Midcentury Modern comes along, he's probably not that comfortable with it. And so he starts hiring architects straight out of architecture school. LeGroux, who worked there in 46 and 47 and would have worked on this bank project. Robert Stephen, who was there in the late 1940s, and LeGroux and Robert Stephen overlapped for a period. And then later, Donald O'Rourke. Now, their period of working together lasted longer, and in fact, they were partners in a firm for a big chunk of the 1950s. So if he was intimidated by and unfamiliar with the modern style that was coming into vogue, he had the team that could work on that and be very comfortable with it. There is no question that the output of Bowen's firm in the late 40s and the 50s was greatly impacted by LeGroux, Stephen, and O'Rourke. So LeGroux worked on this project in 46 and 47, and like the bank does, that opened in 1948, other late 40s projects of the firm that serve as symbols of mid-century modern emerging as a popular style include a new building for Abdallah's in Opelousas, car dealerships around the region, and doctor's offices around the region. I'm not certain what projects Robert Stephen worked on, but aim to find that out, and many projects by Bowen and O'Rourke are well documented, and that will be incorporated into future iterations of my research. By 1952, a crucial year for Lafayette's modern landscape, A. Hayes Towne was established as a modernist architect, known throughout the Gulf Coast for his commercial projects, such as the 1939 Iberia Parish Courthouse in New Iberia in the Art Moderne style. Towne's first major project in Lafayette, Blackham Coliseum, Acadiana's first large-scale sporting and entertainment events venue, was a bit spaceship-like and modern in every way. It heralds the need for the need for the Coliseum serves as a precursor to what will follow next in terms of major modern development in Lafayette. But before we get there, to understand again the speed at which Lafayette was changing, by the mid-60s, Towne's version of Blackham Coliseum was no longer adequate, and the capacity needed to be nearly doubled. By the mid-60s, Towne had moved on to mainly residential work in the style that you probably know him for, and his mid-century modern days were behind him. So it was David Perkins, a committed modernist and founder of the architecture program at SLI, now UL, that was turned to for ideas for renovating and expanding Blackham Coliseum. Thanks to Scott Chapuis, who's here tonight, a principal in Molière Chapuis, now the name of the architectural firm that Dave Perkins founded 68 years ago. We are looking at Dave Perkins' early idea for the project. Now, if you know Blackham Coliseum, you know that this design is not the one that happened, and that this is the design that happened. It's pretty much the building that you see now, though I don't know how much it's even looked at these days, which is quite sad. But maybe the great success of the UL Gala that was held there this year will lead to appreciation again, because they made it look quite fantastic. By the 50s, when Blackham Coliseum was first being used, times were rapidly changing. And that is when the ethos was defined by the business and civic leaders of the area. So, ethos, the fundamental spirit. That's the definition of ethos. The leaders of the town came together and essentially, I've learned through all these newspaper articles that I've read from the time, basically established, and I don't mean in a formal way, but basically established what needed to happen for Lafayette to become the town that it would become. So the oil center was absolutely necessary because of booming economy with oil as its foundation. The university was critical to Lafayette becoming the hub city, and we'll talk about the reason why a bit later. The Petroleum Club, where you are tonight, designed by Hayes Towne, was a must for the social scene. Later, Oakbourne, designed by Robert Stephen, and the Townhouse, designed by LeGroux, would all serve that role as well. Medical services had to be top-notch, and it was forecasted that Lafayette will, quote, be a top medical center, and that became a driving force for changes that happened in the 1950s. And an expanded airport was a must, and Robert Stephen designed the new airport. So you've already heard Robert Stephen's name several times tonight. That's how important he was in the early years of the changing of Lafayette architecturally. So the next major project, more major by far than Blackham Coliseum, that allowed Hayes Towne to change the architectural landscape of Lafayette and the economic landscape of all of Acadiana, is the oil center. Towne had been thinking about how to develop a second business district, a modern one specifically, in Lafayette as far back as 1926, when he presented his senior thesis project at Tulane. Just an idea at the time, it couldn't come to life until Towne met Maurice Hyman. one of Lafayette's leading businessmen in the late 30s. It was still just an idea, town's idea, that needs to be made very clear, until oil boys, as Hyman called them, came to him positing the idea that oil companies would place offices in Lafayette if there was a dedicated area for that to happen. Hyman first suggested a multi-story building downtown, but that was rejected by them. There needed to be ease, parking ease, networking ease, socializing ease, and other businesses that made it a real district, a separate district, that would impress and lure movers and shakers from all over the country to move here. That's when Hyman turned to town to revisit his thesis proposition. Now, what you are seeing here is the very first sketch that ever ran in any newspaper of town's idea for the oil center. And I'm going to read you, because some of you can't see it. This is the preliminary sketch of the proposed oil center, which Baton Rouge architect A. Hayes Town presented to Maurice Hyman this week. Hyman and a group of Lafayette oilmen looked the plans over and gave Town figures of approximate footages their companies will need in the building. Town was expected back in Lafayette late this week with a revised sketch showing floor spaces as it will be allocated to the various companies. Small building shown at far upper left very faintly is a suggested shopping center, which oilmen have felt may be valuable to employees in the center. The building, in the shape of a large block S with covered walks closing the open spaces, why would open be in quotation marks, will have a coffee shop in the transverse between the two patios. Sounds pretty great, right? This is it. This is the first idea. This is how the oil center began. But within months, not a year, but within months, this was already deemed inadequate because so many were already committing to be part of the oil center. And so this is a second sketch, which actually has the Petroleum Club added. So mystery solved. Every time I've ever gone out the main entrance of the Petroleum Club, I thought, why are these angles so insane? I just thought they added on, and it was the Petroleum Club's fault that there were all these weird angles. Well, turns out Town liked angles for this idea, and so we can thank Town for that. So yeah, within months, this was the next iteration. I also want you to note that you heard in that caption that he would be back, I think it said 2 weeks later, with new ideas. Maurice Hyman was clearly popping a whip, because in every article, it would say, Town presented his ideas for the war memorial. They were rejected, and he'll be back next week to present a new idea. I mean, truly, Scott, I hope your clients don't do you like that when you all are designing. But Maurice, I mean, think about it. It was 1950s. They were not working on CAD. They were not able to do what can be done today in an architecture firm. But he would return the next week with an all-new sketch and an idea. The project of the oil center was hailed in newspapers throughout the region as being a game changer. And as a $1 million project just for the buildings that you see there. In today's dollars, that's nearly $13 million just for this part. Eventually, the project grew to $1.5 million for the early phase. But the sky's the limit was Maurice Hyman's guiding principle. And Hayes Town is who was able to manifest that mindset physically. Hayes Town took complete credit for the project for the rest of his life. In the 60s, this was written about what his idea had become. This was written in the mid-60s, what I'm going to read to you. The unique and fabulous oil center, sprawling over the equivalent of 8 city squares, consists of 42 buildings, all one-story structures, each carrying its own off-street parking. These buildings total in excess of 400,000 square feet of space, all of which was built especially to accommodate the oil industry. There are approximately 200 tenants occupying offices ranging from 200 square feet to as much as 20,000 square feet. In the oil center, besides offices for the greater portion of the major oil companies in the country, are located the Conservation Commission, a post office, a bank, a $2 million motel, which we'll get to in just a bit, a $1.5 million petroleum club, which you're sitting in tonight, owned by members of the petroleum industry, and many other facilities such as fine shopping centers, an oil log library, etc. I love these two aerials together because it shows you 1953, that's the part they're talking about. And you can see the angled part in the back there. To orient you, that's Pinhook on the left, the line of trees. And as you can see, the boulevards aren't even in yet, right? This is St. Mary Boulevard down at the bottom where the cars are, and Pinhook going where the line of trees is. On the right, obviously, everything had changed by the mid-'80s. You can see that it's fully developed all the way down to the municipal auditorium. Just a reminder of how great these buildings are and why they're so important, that they are preserved in proper ways. This is 201 Hyman Boulevard today. This was built in 1955. It's one of our town's buildings. You'll note that all the buildings use the St. Joe brick. You know, and this is an example of just some of the buildings in the oil center today. And, you know, we live adjacent to the oil center, and so really the oil center is our neighborhood. And I must say that it makes me sad on some days when I drive through and it's very clear that there is no cohesive design direction for the oil center anymore, and it pretty much seems that anything goes. So, you know, just think about it. If that's the way it's going to be, and that's what people want, okay, but I think there's a better way to think about what a gem this all is. Now, if you have got all that was happening in the boom, there needed to be a place to accommodate those visiting the region, whether it be for business or pleasure. And Hyman turned to town for that also. Completed in 1956, you see here the Townhouse Motor Hotel. First of all, let me just ask, be honest. How many of you have ever stayed at the Townhouse Motor Motel? Anyone in the room? Yes, so one person. How many of you, because you lived in town, maybe went to entertainment there, ever just walked in it? How many of you walked in it ever? Okay, a few people. Was it fabulous? Parts of it. The restaurant, was the restaurant good? It was a big deal. Okay, so it was a big deal. Of course, we're going to get to that in just a second. He sure did. Reading from an article written prior to the groundbreaking for the construction, and I love everything in this because it just speaks to the mindset. Quote, "The motel is designed according to an interior plan in which the units are grouped in clusters. Each group of units will be built around an interior garden court. Features of the individual units are air conditioning, telephone service, a carport, and a tropical porch. Overlooking the kidney-shaped swimming pool and sand beach will be a 2-story unit with cabanas. The entire area is to be landscaped in accordance with the atmosphere of lush relaxation bestowed by the motel." I mean, you want to check in, right? "Also conducive to fine living will be the motel's main dining room and its private dining rooms. Each group of units," this was key for the oil center, those oil boys, as Hyman called them, "each group of units will have a separate cocktail lounge. Some 12 to 15 suites or rooms can be arranged from the units. Lee Brothers will operate the townhouse. The firm runs similar motels," and this is key, "the firm runs similar motels in New Orleans and Houston. The Oil Center Motel will have a staff of 50 persons to provide the ultimate in the best of hotel service," end quote. That sums it all up. The mindset, the ambition, the energy, the aren't we worth it, like Houston and New Orleans, vibe of 1950s Lafayette. Now, like the Azar House did in Secretariat, the townhouse had a major role in the 1975 Nouveau Noir movie, The Drowning Pool. How many of you have ever seen The Drowning Pool? That's a good movie for architecture of the region. And so you see here, this is a screenshot that I took when we were watching the movie, and Paul Newman they're waiting on him. I don't want to give anything away. There's Mr. Hyman going on a bridge over that kidney-shaped pool with the sand beach around. Very proud of what he's built, and you can see that one of the interior courts, that's just after it was completed. And then here's a screenshot from the Drowning Pool showing the pool. And also, I like to see what's across the street, and because you get the whole vibe of the area.
Tell them how that's not the Drowning Pool.
Yeah, but that's giving too much away. The drowning pool is somewhere else in Lafayette. It's not there, don't worry. See the movie.
No, it's at Hyman's house. Oh, sorry.
You've made me lose my, it's your fault, Tim. As I said earlier, one of the key aspects of Lafayette becoming the hub city and realizing the vision that leaders had for it was the medical world. And there were several key projects that built that foundation that has been expanded upon greatly from then to now. And they were all mid-century modern. They include Lafayette Medical and Surgical Center, later Hamilton Medical Group, where a lot of you went to doctor's appointments over the years. So designed by Haystown, it's totally mid-century modern with the flat roofs, separate buildings connected by breezeways, and simple but ample fenestration. And when I found this is Haystown's own drawing of the project, if you look you can obviously see the hospital in the back, and Begnode's Pharmacy is to the right of the hospital. And I'm sorry to y'all, but I don't have a choice if I turn this way, but I do feel bad that my back keeps getting turned to you. I'm very aware of it. But this was Haystown's design. And, again, this had a long life, and now is where Burden Real is. This is what it looked like circa 1971 when it was photographed. It's too bad someone didn't close that curtain upstairs, isn't it? It's driving me crazy. The designer in me wants to get some clever person to fix that in Photoshop or something. Sorry. In 1953, Town designed a very groovy building that is seen here in the sketch that was released to the public. I'm going to read the caption for this, if I can see it. An artist's sketch submitted to members of the War Memorial Committee by architect A. Haystown shows Lafayette's projected 450,000 War Memorial Civic Center as a basically one-story structure. A small section to be built at Pinhook Road and Oak Avenue will be 2 stories high. The stilts will allow a clear view of the patio in the center for those passing by. Officials have hope a plaque can be erected to the war dead of Lafayette at the fountain in the front of the building. This project is in the medical section of my presentation because at the time that it was first designed, about 2/3 of it was allocated for public health clinics of a lot of varieties. We're going to see this building later. Sadly, it's in terrible shape now, but still has the bones and details of Town's original design. This is a photo taken of it in the late 50s, early 60s, and we'll talk about what it is later. Next, the big kahuna of the oil center, Lafayette General. If you look going towards the municipal auditorium, you can see in this 1963 aerial view that the hospital is under construction, and you can see the Haystown building across the street where Burden Real is now that we looked at earlier, and you can see Begnode's Pharmacy across the street from that. Seen here that I discovered digging in an archive last week is the original design for Lafayette General Hospital. There's been a big mystery for years about who was the architect. So it turns out that Perry Segura, who also will become part of my research project down the road, was the official architect for the hospital. But the consulting architect was A. Haystown. And it actually says that on the drawing, right under Perry Segura's name. The hospital was state-of-the-art, and it was a game changer for all of Acadiana, and having all of the Ochsner Medical Center in town now is still a game changer for our area and why Lafayette can be the hub city that it is. Now, if you're going to have a full and enjoyable life, play has to come into the picture. And the leaders of Lafayette understood that. So in 1955, they allocated $1.3 million for park improvements. That's $15.63 million today. Now, this was such a big deal that there was a big article about it that ran in the September 1955 issue of a magazine called The American City. And I'm going to read that and just think about the importance of parks and how they do make our lives here special. Voters in Lafayette, Louisiana, early this summer, took emphatic action to meet the need for recreation facilities in their town. At a special election, the residents of this community of less than 40,000 persons overwhelmingly endorsed a $1.3 million recreation bond proposal for capital improvements. Among the areas and facilities they will purchase are 8 playground areas ranging in size from 2 to 4 acres and 2 major parks with swimming pools. In addition, extensive improvements are planned for the existing golf course, playgrounds, and school and church grounds used for community recreation purposes. Behind this successful campaign, one of the largest ever passed for recreation in a community of this size, lies a story of impressive planning and community organization. Is that music to your ears, Roxana? That it takes great planning for these things to happen? I'm sure it is. The drawing that you see there is a slightly, or not so slightly, fantastical drawing of Robert Stevens' design for all of the restrooms and shelter-covered areas of 2 parks in Lafayette. So, for those of you who grew up here, where am I? Where am I? How many of you say I'm at Girard Park? A lot of you yelled out Girard Park. We are not, in fact. We are not, in fact, at Girard Park. We are, but they are very familiar to you, aren't they? Because they are exactly like those that are in Girard Park. But I must say that the ones that are at Hyman Park on the north side are much more appropriately colored. Another topic for a different day. I took both of these pictures and I intentionally tried to get them from the exact same angle so that you could see that when Robert Stevens was designing all of the restrooms and the pool and the main building of the park, he was designing 2 of those, and they are the exact same facilities. And actually the ones at Hyman Park are in better shape than the ones at Girard Park, but there you go. Of course, you all know this building, which is the Girard Park main building. Robert Stevens designed the original 1-story portion of the building, and then later Dave Perkins designed the addition and expansion to be a 2-story building. So the next time you drive by Girard Park or you're walking Girard Park, pay attention to these fantastic mid-century modern structures and think about Robert Stevens and Dave Perkins and the great work they did there and how important it is for these buildings to stay in great condition and be maintained well. Now, play, of course, is part of why the municipal auditorium needed to happen, right? There needed to be productions of shows and things to entertain. And so in 1959, this was completed. And I'm going to read you, I like to look at the captions here that was from a postcard that actually the general manager of the auditorium wrote. Lafayette, Louisiana, home of Southwest Louisiana's Mardi Gras pageants and balls. Permanent seating, 2,332. Stage dimensions, 50 by 108. Facilities for stage shows, banquets, parties, sales meetings, exhibitions, conventions. Completely air-conditioned, the South's Convention Center. And I will tell you that every article that was written about the auditorium and the need for it talked about how it would become a place where conventions would be held because of how state-of-the-art it was and how fantastic it was. This is another one of those great buildings here in town that is constantly in danger of being lost. So if you treasure it, talk about that. Write to the people that need to hear you say that you treasure it, because your voice does matter in these things. So don't not use your voice. That's what they would like you to do. So speak up when you think that something should be saved. Now, the university is absolutely crucial to what Lafayette is now and has always been. And just for a moment, imagine if all UL buildings were gone and we had no university. We'd be in a completely different town, totally. And the university was a draw for the oil executives because they knew that a university town is an educated town. I'm very interested in the connection between the university and the mid-century modern ethos and the role that the university played as both a design site that employed many architects during President Fletcher's great building boom and beyond, but also the role that educators in the architecture, design, and fine art programs have played in making Lafayette what it is. For example, there's a fantastic house across the street from us that's not in my presentation that's a really wonderful mid-century modern house. And it was designed by Raymond Reed, who's an unknown architect, generally speaking, but he was a professor at UL. And he was hired by Dr. Straub to design the house because Dr. Straub was a Californian, and he wanted to use redwood for the house, and that was not a common building material here. And so he felt that he needed a Californian that actually would understand that type of construction to design his house. I'm interested in those stories, the way that an architecture professor might have worked on one or two projects during the 3 or 4 years that they taught here, but those might be really interesting projects to explore. Now, obviously, what we're looking at is the library. This is the first iteration. Well, I don't know why I said obviously. You may not know that because you wouldn't imagine that at this point. But this is the first iteration of Dupré Library that, again, was a mystery for years. And what I learned is that Perry Brown and Perry Segura was an associate in Perry Brown's office, and by the way, Perry Brown had worked for Hayes Town before going out on his own. So Perry Brown probably designed some of the buildings in the oil center because he would have been working for him during that period. Designed the first iteration of the library that you see here. It was always, I now know from archival research, intended to be a building that would be expanded to 3 floors. It was actually built to be able to support 2 additional floors. And I have actually read the letters that talk about that. And so when, that was just, to me, that's so forward thinking, that the university knew that the university was gonna grow at such a pace that when they had the money, they would want to make their library even bigger. The interesting thing is that project began only a few years later, the expansion. So within a few years, it was time to go from this, and I just think that incredible undulated design on the front is so magnificent. Every time I see these pictures, I'm reminded of how fantastic that design is of the overhang there at the front door. To this, which was designed by LeGroux and Perkins. And Mrs. Perkins will probably remember that they brought in Perry Brown as a consultant on the project because Perry Brown had designed the original. So the second and third floors were added in a project that was completed in 1967. I mean, that's only 5 years after the original library opened. Now, just to show you some other images of it, that's a side image. Now, I owe someone an apology. I don't know who. But when I presented in November, I talked about how I essentially was a little dramatic and was saying that it's unrecognizable at this point from what it was. And I stand fully corrected because it's one of those design historian moments that you're just so thrilled to have, even if you have to apologize to someone for it. I was there last week and I got a little turned around when I came out of the elevator. I just didn't go the way I usually go for some reason. And I ended up facing what you see in the right image. I'm inside, and as soon as I saw it, I had to go investigate. And I realized that brise-soleil or sunscreen that you see there was something that LeGroux and Perkins designed when they did their renovation of the library. And in fact, the entire side of this side of the library, this is the side that basically faces what is going to be the new Wisdom Church and the Hyman House, is all the original. There is nothing covered up on the side. So if you're interested in seeing what LeGroux and Perkins did that was so magnificent to the library, go take a walk around it and you actually can see that. Now, where's all that money going to go that's being made in this town, right? I mean, a lot of money was being made, and the banking industry clearly was profiting hugely because Guarantee Bank went on an absolute building spree and started building banks all over the region. And they employed a lot of architects during that time, different architects. In this case, what you're looking at are two branches that were being built in 1956. The one at the top was at Four Corners, and it was designed by Robert Stephen. And the one at the bottom is right around the corner. That's now the Chase Bank at the corner of Pinhook and Oil Center Drive. It was originally designed in 1956 by Haystown. Now, in 1968, David Perkins did a renovation in addition to the Guarantee Bank, now Chase, at Pinhook and Oil Center Drive. So you see the version it became in 68, and it's now something, actually they still, I think, Scott or someone from the office, I think it still has the detail at the top. Interestingly. Yeah, it does. It doesn't have the drive-through in that same place. The drive-through's across the street, but it still has the Soleil Brise there, right? Or Brise Soleil, sorry. There. Interesting. I just realized that. And again, thank you to Scott Chapuis for letting me use all these great images that came out of the Perkins firm. LeGroux and Hal Perkins designed this great building in 1961, Home Savings and Loan Association downtown. I think someone is here tonight who works in this building, is that right? Yes, Andre Bro, grandson of LeGroux, now works in the building that his grandfather's firm designed. And so you can see there another fantastic screen on the facade of the building with the glass curtain wall set back behind it. And then this is the major project that employed LeGroux, Hal Perkins, and David Perkins. This was such a major project for Guarantee Bank. This is the downtown main bank of Guarantee Bank back then. The project was announced in the fall of 1967, and it was completed in 1970. It was a 3-year project, and it was a major scale. It got a lot of attention, and it was published. I happen to love the January-February 1971 issue of it, that was in Louisiana Architect, which shows it at night lit up with the fantastic oak tree in front. It just sort of, it speaks so much to what Southwest Louisiana looks like physically, and then you have this amazing glass box sitting there. And then here's what the interiors looked like, decked out in amazing mid-century modern glory with all of the right pieces. I mean, I see Saarinen, I see Eames, and we could go on about what pieces are in these images. Another facet of this that is of great interest to me, and honestly, I'm not going to say too much about it tonight, because the next big presentation that I give in Lafayette will be in the winter, and it will be on the exploration that I am diving into on the role that mid-century modern design played as the visual image of the expansion of the Catholic religion throughout Acadiana. But for now, I want to give you a spin through Our Lady of Fatima Catholic Church that was designed by the LeGroux and Hal Perkins firm. This is a 1957 sketch of it. As much as I can, I like to use the original sketches, even if the quality is not great for now, because to me that's so great to see the architect's vision. And I'm showing this because I have now learned that the terrazzo floors and this particular color scheme was a color scheme and a flooring material that LeGroux and Perkins used, certainly in at least one other ecclesiastical project that I know about of theirs. But I also just like looking at the simplicity of the neutral marble that's on the back wall. All of them, this church was state of the art when it was built. And all the articles about it talked about all the technological innovations that they were able to utilize in the project. And it actually that got as much attention about what it was offering in terms of being state of the art as the design, and the design is spectacular. I mean, that view alone, and I don't know, honestly, I had only been in Fatima one time prior to a while back when, thankfully, Doris Reagan Tatford got me in there for a very special tour, so thank you, DT, for that. And I was awed. I don't think I had ever stood, well, I know I had never stood at the front of this church and looked back at the windows. And they are truly awing. And their story alone, I mean, the artisans that LeGroux and Perkins worked with on this project and the level of high design that was going on with this project is at a whole other level that come to my talk in the winter. Now, I have not yet seen this in person, but St. Jules Catholic Church is exactly the kind of church I'm talking about. That is obviously a church, right? But it is so very modern in the way that the steeple and the cross are handled in the hands of the firm of LeGroux and Hal Perkins, and this was really Hal Perkins' project. I've interviewed Mrs. Perkins, who I'm, again, so happy is here tonight, about the work that went into this church, and I've seen amazing images, and I've even seen some things that were in it. And I really cannot wait to explore the design of this space. And I'm already thinking about some comparisons to European design by great modern masters in the 1920s and 30s, and the work that was being done there in churches and cathedrals. Now, it wasn't just the Catholics that were expanding. The Episcopalians expanded too. And this is such an interesting project to me. I have wondered for a long time who designed St. Barnabas. Every time I drive by it, in fact. It's actually a style of architecture that I personally really, really love. It reminds me so much of like coastal and Hawaiian architecture. It's not actually very ecclesiastical. And I think that makes it extra interesting. And again, thanks to Scott Chapuis, I now know that Dave Perkins was the architect, and this is his 1964 drawing. You can even see it's multimedia and people arriving for church. And I just think it's interesting because to me, what's happening here is St. Barnabas is making a statement. As they formed their own church, that this represents who they are. And I think that that's what ecclesiastical architecture does. Building a strong knowledge base about the gems of mid-century modern that we have in the region is the ultimate goal of this project. That is in hopes that it will foster preservation. Roxana Usner, Lafayette Historic Preservation Planner, who has led efforts for recognition and protection and believes the real issue is that, quote, people aren't educated about the difference between personal taste and design excellence. They don't understand why historic buildings matter and why it does not matter that to some people, even building owners, they don't find the style of the building appealing to their individual taste, end quote. And further, the idea has been posited that the best thing for the city parish government to do if they want to foster preservation efforts would be to set a precedent of commitment to preservation by designating their own mid-century modern buildings as protected, because they are symbols of stellar design that represent one of Acadiana's most important and design-forward chapters. I propose that they start with the A. Hayes Town Design Lafayette War Memorial that is now in deplorable condition and has become an eyesore. It is really a travesty. You saw the design for this building earlier. You saw what it looked like when it was recently completed, and this is what it looks like today. I took this picture earlier this week. So this is its current condition. If anyone needs an example of how preservation can be achieved, they only need to look just down the street from where we are tonight at what has recently been completed at 126 Hyman Boulevard on one of the original Hayes Town Design buildings of the Oil Center. This is the renovation and restoration project of Holly and Smith Architects. I have no idea who Holly and Smith Architects are. Is there anyone here from that firm or anyone who works in this building? It's been done so remarkably well. I took this picture just a couple of days ago when Scott Shepwee pointed out to me how well it had been done, and I had already heard from Roxana how well it had been done. May this be a beacon of good things to come in preservation of mid-century modern architecture in Acadiana. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, certainly.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. This was very well done, and I really appreciate the work that you've put into it. I want to thank again Docomomo, the nonprofit that allowed this presentation to happen. And if you love the architecture that Jeffrey talked about today, please consider becoming a member or donating to Docomomo, because their purpose is specifically to document and preserve the mid-century modern architecture around the Gulf South, well, throughout the world actually. And you know, in Lafayette, Louisiana especially, we need a resurgence of a little bit of love for our mid-century modern style architecture, because as somebody from South California told me a couple of years ago, he was shocked at the number of mid-century modern buildings a town like Lafayette, not California, has in its city. And so this is a gem. It makes us unique. It tells our history. It tells our story. And it really is something that we need to preserve as a culture for our city. So, yeah, thank you for the love, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming.